here we are once again, literary as a Feck. I'm not going to do the customary intro because that's you're good at doing that, so I'll just leave it. Yeah, Nick's a little ill this week, so
his first post-COVID cold in nearly 2 years, so my body has no idea what to do.
In lieu of an intro, I actually have, before we get on to the meat of things, I have a recommendation for both you and our rabid viewership, because I know you like a bit of existential angst, as do I. So this was a book I was thinking of doing for the show and ended up reading it apart because my wife wanted to read it. So we read it together. She read the Japanese translation.
About you took literary advice from your wife. I think we devoted a previous episode to how rare a thing that is for you and I.
Well, it wasn't a recommendation. It was something she was going to read, and of course it was already on my list. And you know, a man. Several men had already. Yes, had already. Yes. Yeah, of course. I'm not a fool, Nick. And there goes half our listenership. So two people have walked.
Yes. Yeah.
And she was about to read it, and she said, because we kind of quite like to read together sometimes. It's a thing. And there's a film based on this book as well, which I was planning to watch. So that's why I read it apart from Literary as Feck, because I had a feeling it would be a very Literary as Feck book, and it was. And I'd like to recommend it to you, Nick. And this is The Tartar Step. Dino Buzzati. Written or published in 1940. And
this is the first I'm hearing of this.
Yeah, basically it's about a guy, a young soldier called Drogo, who gets this assignment to go and live on a fortress which overlooks this desert. This is in a very non-specific place, like they don't specify where it is, and it's just this fortress that overlooks this vast desert frontier, which they always expect is going to be kind of invaded at some point. It's like a waiting for the barbarians kind of thing, but you know, nothing ever comes, and it's nothing happens. It's a book where pretty much nothing happens, and it's fucking great. It's really really good. I would be surprised if you didn't really love this book. This is a very Nick.
It's a great cover as well.
Yeah, I know. It's nice, isn't it? This is the Canon Gate. I wasn't really familiar with this publisher, but they reprinted this with a forward, and so it was turned into a movie as well, which we also watched. That you may be more familiar. The film is called The Desert of the Tartars, which is I
don't know if I've heard of that either. Yeah,
which is the original title in Italian of the book. Very interesting star-studded cast. You got Max von Sydow, or Sydow, Juliana Gemma's in it.
Awesome.
Ringo. He's really good. Like, I'd only known him in like westerns, and not that he's not good in it, but he's really good in Desert of the Tartars.
Yeah, no, he's a guy with some almost unplumbed depths. Every now and again, you'll see something that he's in. You're like, oh, hang on. So this quite like in The Bastard with where he plays the brother of Klaus Kinski.
Oh, I don't think I've seen.
And Rita Hayworth plays their mom. And it's really good. It's a 60s, so it's an early Polizio kind of gangstery film, but it's all this very Oedipal, screwed up, the two brothers and the mom, and there's this crime element, and it's a favorite. And it's all shot in the US too, so that's also quite rare for an Italian production of the 60s. So
there we go.
It's a great soundtrack.
It's on the list.
Il Bastardo, I think, is the
Fernando Reyes in it as well. Whole bunch of interesting Francisco Rabal, whole bunch of interesting people, and it's a pretty good film as well. It's considered a bit of a classic. It's the last film by a guy. What was his name? I forget his name now. He's the guy who directed Black Jesus, that movie with Woody Strode as the kind of African activist who's locked up, and which is
okay,
also,
right.
Yeah. So I would recommend both the book and the film. The only thing with the film was, I think the film is probably very good, but watching it after reading the book, you could really appreciate what a good adaptation of the book is. But I can't imagine how that film would play if you hadn't read the book.
Yeah.
So I'll be interested to see how you get on with both of them.
And I have rigorously avoided watching the film adaptation of the book we're going to talk about today.
I haven't seen it yet either.
My understanding is it's not very good, and that it also weaves chunks of the sequel's plot in because they wanted to give Doc, the main character, or one of the main characters, a kind of a love story, which does apparently feature in the sequel, Sweet Thursday or whatever it's called.
Right.
But yeah, I've heard, none of the reviews I read of the movie of Cannery Row seem to rate it very highly, so I thought,
right,
maybe not worth the time.
It's early 80s though, isn't it? So it's I think Nick Nolte was still intelligible in those days. Like
yes.
He hadn't quite yet descended.
Yeah. He wasn't the phlegmy caveman that he's become. At a certain point where, like, you know, because you used to always think about what's his name? Mad Teeth as the poor man's Nick Nolte, you know. He was in Gary somebody.
Oh, Gary Busey.
Yeah, Gary Busey. Yeah, in my mind,
yes.
as a kid, Gary Busey was always kind of like, oh yeah, he's the guy you go to if you can't afford Nick Nolte. But at a certain point, they just sort of overlapped and became the same mad kind of person you see in a police, you know, photograph in a Hawaiian shirt and hair out to here, and you know. Right.
Yes, I think they have, probably very similar police lineup shots, right?
Yeah. But anyhow, so
Sweet Thursday, and the sequel to the book which you chose this time, which is
Cannery Row by John Steinbeck, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to read this or Tortilla Flat. Well, Tortilla Flat is one of the my dad, generally speaking, it was not a huge reader. He tends more to be a nonfiction guy, a guy who reads magazines about the sports he does, like, you know, big stacks of windsurfing magazines or, you know, mountain bike magazines and stuff. So, you know, as a kid, it was pretty rare to see my dad open a novel, you know.
Once again, I do think we need to send someone to your hometown to investigate if you look like your man or not.
So yeah, but my dad did at one point say to me, "Oh, you should really read John Steinbeck's Tortilla Flat. It's really funny. It's really entertaining." And I was like, okay. So I filed it away because, again, my dad hasn't recommended a huge number of books to me over the years. It's still on the list, especially maybe even more so after reading this.
Right. I hope it's good, because that would be a sad end to that story.
Yes, that would be.
I'd only ever look at one book, and it was shit, and I threw it out the window.
So I mean, you know, I assume most people probably maybe know who John Steinbeck is.
I don't think we need to belabor the Steinbeck point.
But I do think that a lot of people have an impression of him that they get through, maybe, like me, for example, you know, when I was in high school, we were made to read Of Mice and Men, you know, and then carted off to see the movie with Malkovich and Gary Sinise, which came out when I was in high school.
I think, if memory serves, we were taken to see a stage production, I think.
Okay. That would be better.
I don't think I've ever seen the film.
Okay. So yeah. And, you know, The Grapes of Wrath, which would be the other kind of, you know, so that's like really heavy, sad, Depression era kind of stories, right? One shorter and one, you know, epic in scope. And it's neither of those are anywhere close to my favorite Steinbeck books, for different reasons.
Right.
Not a huge fan of either. I mean, I remember enjoying The Grapes of Wrath at a certain point of my life, and then watching the movie, the John Ford film, I think very disappointed.
Oh, really?
Feeling like at the time. Now, maybe if I went back to it now, not close to the novel, I might enjoy. But it felt to me like they'd pulled a lot of the punches, like a lot of the kind of the more radical politics.
It was 1940, right? So
sure.
Yeah. I just to follow on. So with my Steinbeck history as well was also Grapes of Wrath and Of Mice and Men, and my wife's actually a big Steinbeck fan as well. So East of Eden we read together as well,
which I haven't, and I've never seen the movie with James Dean either. So
yeah, similar to Grapes of Wrath in so much as the film is somewhat different from the book, but if you take it as its own thing, it is a great film, as I think Grapes of Wrath is a great film, and both are great novels. But like you said, they have this epic, kaleidoscopic kind of, tale to tell, which just to preempt a little bit what you might be going to say here, I think Cannery Row is, in a way, equally as epic, but it's been like crammed into digest size, which makes for blistering reading, in my opinion. I fucking love this book.
Yeah, me too. Good. I'm glad we're on the same page then.
Yeah.
So
sorry, I interrupted. You were going to say, because you have some more familiarity with other shorter Steinbeck books, because I don't.
Yeah. So I think, well, at around the same time, or maybe shortly after reading those, I read In Dubious Battle, which was the book he wrote, one of the books he wrote shortly before, I'm trying to actually remember, the date's not coming to me, but I know that it's before Grapes of Wrath, and it's really focused, it's a much more narrow scope, it's really focused on just this Salinas Valley fruit pickers strike. Basically, some kind of slightly outside communist agitator guys come in and sort of help foment or organize this strike, and it's much more, it's an angry book, like it's seething, but boiling with rage, that book. And I remember really liking it. Now I know the time in my life, obviously that was the thing I was looking for.
Right. I was about to say, it does sound like
I don't, it'd be interesting to see how, but it's still Steinbeck, right? So the man.
No, I understand, but I can just imagine you reading that and then watching A Bullet for the General.
Yes. Absolutely. And so I think what surprised me was just how funny Steinbeck can be. And I think that's the thing that's missed. A lot of people wouldn't realize that he was also a very adept humorist. And my understanding is that Tortilla Flat is very funny. That's what my dad, he recommended it as being a book that he thought was really entertaining. And then this book, although it has moments of great darkness, it's not all like it definitely leavens its kind of humor and kind of its happy-go-lucky, almost Bud Spencer, Terrence Hill kind of jauntiness with occasional flashes of like, ooh, that's grim. Which is nice too, it's not.
I think this is a fantastic book, and like you, I kind of, it's not that I don't like longer books. I do prefer shorter books in general, or more precise, I think I like books that are the right length that they are supposed to be. And a lot of books are not, right? And I don't think Grapes of Wrath or East of Eden are too, I think they're just the size they should be as well, right? But there's something about this really potent, because I was thinking it was Steinbeck, and I was thinking it was something I was going to have to sit with a little bit to kind of ruminate, and not heavy exactly, but just so, it's very nutritional reading, isn't it, Johnson?
Yes.
You do a couple of chapters or something, and you might put it down and light your pipe and think about what you've read, and then slowly, my experience of both Grapes of Wrath and East of Eden, they took like a couple of weeks or something, and so I was surprised that I blasted through this one in a couple of sittings, pretty much, and I can easily have imagined if I'd have prepared, I could have sat through it in one. Like,
yeah,
it's a fast read.
Yes, yeah. So I suppose maybe we should quickly outline. I mean, it doesn't exactly have a it does have a plot, right? But it
has
very,
a trajectory. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
But it's all set in Monterey, California, in a place which is now called Cannery Row, which is fascinating to me. It wasn't then, but it's been named after the book, which is an area which is full of fish canneries, and basically it follows a series of kind of characters who live in this area, I guess, and there are various misadventures. I mean, I guess there are
right. It's interesting as well. When I started it, I thought it would be a lot more fishy and maritime than it was.
Right. Oh, there's some great description. There is some great description of
there are. I like
the character Doc goes out to kind of catch fish when he goes further up to La Jolla. There's some wonderful
it's all shoreline stuff. It's all like digging octopuses out.
Yes.
And there's some nice descriptions of silver rivers of billions of fish. I mean, there's a lot of striking imagery. I mean, it is a fantastically well written. The prose just sparkles.
And it is where he grew up. So I think there's a complete mastery and complete understanding of place in the book that comes from this is a place where he grew up and a place where he returned to, I think, in at a time when his life was falling apart. It sounds like Steinbeck himself.
Right.
He went back there out of nostalgia and out of just. So yeah, there's a great love for a place that I think comes across really clear.
Well, more than that as well. Like, as you're reading it, you're like, there are some passages and where you're introduced to a character or a small little, there's lots of little mini stories and nuggets and things, and you're like, fuck that could be a book in itself. That could be a book in itself. It's a real like Rosetta Stone of Steinbeck, isn't it? It's
yes.
And
it made me look up something. There's a part in the book where they mention some other famous writer who'd come to Monterey and then died in his hotel room, and then taken to the funeral home, and his viscera is kind of taken out and tossed into a back gully. A kid comes out of this gully with his dog with this liver of this, but that's all true. I went to, and I was like, is this a real person? I looked, it was a real person, right down to the story of the liver apparently being. I was like, that's awesome.
Wow, I assumed that must have been made up, but it's interesting.
Yeah. And so I mean the character. So I mean, in some ways, I guess we don't really have a main character. We have a bunch, but Doc is one of our main characters, and he is this. He's not a doctor.
No, he's a marine biologist of sorts.
Yeah, but possibly even not properly.
Just a hobbyist or something.
Yeah.
What strikes me, what's interesting about the book, so you have he's one of the main characters, and there's also the Chinese grocer and
Li Chong,
and like these guys who hang out in a flop house and frequent the broth.
Mac, apparently Emmett Walsh plays Mac in the movie, which is one of the things I was like, that's pretty cool.
Yes. Now that you say it, I remember when they did an interview with him in Shock Cinema. There's a photograph from Cannery Row, and it's Emmett Walsh with his fistful of frogs.
There you go.
But what fascinated me was I couldn't quite. I mean, it made sense. It totally made sense without them going out of their way to explain why exactly does everyone in this town revere Doc so? Like, they love Doc, right? Like, he's the learned man, right? Like, he's the one they all look up to. But he doesn't particularly do anything to earn their love, really. But they all rally around there's this thing about putting on a big party for him, right? Which is kind of, and you're just like, wow, they worship this dude, right? I found that kind of interesting, but it rang true. It rang really true.
Yeah. And he is apparently based very closely on a real person that John Steinbeck was very close to, who was a marine biologist who did live there and did. Right. So I mean, I assume it's. But yeah, the reason why the whole community seems to, I mean, they do talk about him being basically a kind of, he is the doctor to all of the local prostitutes and to the bums, and then he kind of does give them money when, you know.
But it's more than that, I think, because there's a few passages where they say things like, he's been reading that book for a while, like he's sitting down and reading a book, like for pleasure, and they can't quite, you know, they can't imagine doing that themselves, like.
Right.
He's of a different species almost, right?
Yes, but he moves among them.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
the
whole expedition. So he sends Mac and the guys out to get frogs for his.
Well, I mean, he does and he doesn't. They go to him because they have this whole thing where they need to get money to throw him a party, but the only way they can get that is to get it from him. So they go and they say, "What do you need?" And he says he needs 800 frogs or whatever he needs, and then
this whole frog expedition was just for me
a fantastic
amazing. Yeah, and one I wish I could have joined. Like, I would go with these dudes.
The whole process, like the constant kind of like sly, you know, trying to get one over people, but not really, not in a mean way, but always trying to cage money or kind of like, you know. And so they need to get Lee Chong's truck, and there's this whole process by which they do that, and they have to fix up the truck, and they need to, and then but the whole part where they meet the guy whose land they're on, where they're getting the frogs, who's this older military guy, and just the way that Mac just effortlessly smooches, like kind of schmoozes with him and like makes him feel good about himself, to the point where like he joins their adventure and feels completely blessed by the end of it to have had a chance to hang out with these bums and go hunting for frogs in a pond on his own property. Just through complimenting him, like I'm telling him his dog is a, you know, but it just seems so real to me. Yeah,
absolutely. It all rings absolutely true. None of it feels, but like you said, a lot of it probably is drawn from real life. So even if you don't know, even if you've never been to that part of the world or know that, it has the ring of authenticity about it. Sometimes that rings through, right? In certain writing, you might know nothing about it really. Like something resonates. You're like, you know, I think this is on the money, right? It feels right somehow, even no matter how unlikely. In fact, sometimes the more unlikely, the more believable it is, because you're thinking no one would write this and expect you to believe it and get away
unless
with it.
It was true.
Yeah.
And so there's various little, like this. I mean, that is, you know, is one of the great parts of it. And then the party that really falls, where everything just goes completely sideways. And the Doc isn't even at this party, which they end up wrecking his house, because he's found a dead woman while at the beach. Right. It's a very dark, disturbing little moment in the book there. But then
reminded me a bit of that bit in Three Men in a Boat, actually, which we read a while back.
It's funny that came to my mind as well. There were elements of that kind of that weird mix of comedy and kind of.
It made me think of that, and that Raymond Carver short story that was part of the movie Shortcuts, where they find a dead teenage girl when on a fishing expedition as well. That
but then so like there's one tiny little chapter all about this guy who moves into a boiler that's been kind of taken out and just dumped and put up on blocks in the thing, and his wife moves in with him, and they live inside this rusting old boiler. And then he starts renting out the adjacent pipes in the boiler to other homeless guys who kind of just like wedge in like a Japanese capsule hotel. And then they start making a little bit of money from this, and then she gets heirs, and at one point, so they start bringing in kind of slightly nicer furniture into this. You just imagine. And then finally she has this kind of breakdown because she really wants curtains, and he's trying to explain to her, but they don't have any windows. She gets really upset that he just doesn't understand what she needs as a woman. That's an awesome little vignette. There's one really dark one near the end of the book where the kids are all out hanging out together, and there's one kid whose dad's died by taking rat poison.
Yeah,
It's just really grim. It's like, it's one of the ones that there's no levity in that little section at all. It's just it's just depressing.
There's a great section as well where he goes off on a bit of a tangent to explain how important the Model T Ford was.
Oh yes,
that was really interesting.
There's that line where there's like 2 generations of men who know more about what's underneath the hood of a Model T Ford than the clitoris.
The clitoris, yeah. And like entire generations were actually conceived in the back of a Model T Ford. And it reminded me, there's a whole bit in East of Eden as well, actually, about the Model T Ford. So it's clearly something he was fascinated by, and
right.
And I suppose he's quite. I suppose if you think about it, if you went back and I mean, that was the first kind of car of the people, right? The kind of affordable car or just about affordable car, or you could get a second-hand one, and in the case of this one which had been through several different owners already, and they modified it. And that's fascinating as well. The whole concept of like pre-MOTs, that you would have just these fucking dangerous ass rust bucket on the road. Like, that's it's brilliant. Everything. Also that, it's funny. Just a pleasure to. I'll read it again one day, I think, just to marinate in it, just to enjoy it.
I'll come back to this in a second, because remind me, I do want to talk about Lee Chong, because I think he's a really interesting character in the book. But that, it wasn't that long ago here in Canada that you could still get away with that, because when I was in high school, my friend Caleb had this car that had been passed down to him from, I think, a grandfather maybe. And it had holes in the floor, like rust holes in the floor, that you had to be careful not to put your feet through, and then like break your ankle while driving. And the alignment was so screwed up that if you took your hands off the wheel for a second, it immediately veered into oncoming traffic. So you had to kind of hold on tightly with both hands.
Familiar. I'm sure I got in some dodgy cars in Wales back in the day.
And at one point we were driving, and the driver's side door just fell off the car. Just like,
hang on. Was your friend a clown by any chance?
He might have been. Now you mention it.
Did this happen every now and again?
Yes, it did. Yes, he did have a big mop of curly red hair.
There we go. I think I might have solved the mystery.
Yeah, but I do remember us having to hold it back on, like him holding it all with one hand and then holding onto the steering wheel tight with the other, because, it was awesome. But anyway,
at least you had wheels, right?
Exactly. But Lee Chong, given when this book is written, is a fairly realized and fairly sympathetic Chinese American character for a time when there was a lot of still Charlie Chan kind of bullshit going on, and Fu Manchu and stuff. Like this story treats its Chinese characters with a lot of respect, and I think that's
well,
impressive.
I think it must have been a thing for Steinbeck as well, because East of Eden, one of the main characters in East of Eden is a Chinese American, and who deliberately goes out of his way to portray himself in a kind of stereotyped, kind of idiotic way, until he shows his true stripes, that he's not a moron at all, right? But he does this kind of subservient kind of act so he can kind of get by and fly under the radar. But he turns out to be, he's actually quite a, learned, well-read, wise fellow. But it's just easier to play that hard, right?
And in a way, Lee Chong's character plays this kind of central. He's like a linchpin to the whole thing, because he owns the flop house where Mac and the boys kind of live, and and then. And that and how he gets it is really sad. That opening, the opening of the story, is where basically, the whole thing about where there's somebody who owes him a ton of money, who has a bunch of kids, who's been coming to the store, and he gives credit to everyone who needs it. He's kind of this he feeds the community. But then at some point, this guy comes in and tries to settle up affairs, realizing he's borrowed too much, and then gives him the building. in lieu of and then goes off and immediately kills himself in the building.
Right.
And it's kind of like, oh.
Yeah, you get the feeling that Lee Chong is just on that knife edge between kind of ruthless and totally fair.
Yes.
Well, isn't he? Like,
yeah.
Like he may take advantage of it if he's got, if he has the, but he's not like, it's almost like sparring or like haggling, or it's that kind of
yes.
It's a way of, in a way, it's kind of a way of communicating with people in a way. It's another form of affection in a way.
yeah, I think so. And then, and I guess the other sort of group of characters are the prostitutes who work out of the, whatever it is, the Bear. It's like it has a restaurant as a name, but it's a brothel.
Right.
And and so Dora is this kind of, and again, they kind of talk about how when you exist in this liminal place of like, you have an illegal business, but yet the government still taxes you. And yet the other people come around and look to you for donations. So she's constantly donating more than anyone else to the local charities and to the policeman's, stuff, because her businesses. It's
quite interesting as well that, she never kind of puts anyone out to pasture. So
yes,
she has a lot of elderly staff.
yes,
working.
Yeah, she's still eating 3 meals a day, but maybe don't turn 3 tricks in a month.
It reminded me of there's that in the movie Barfly.
Mm-hmm.
There's that old lady in the
bar. Yes. Who she has some astonishing line about how she can gulp paste.
I can still swallow paste.
Yeah.
And everyone just goes, ooh.
But actually, it's great that you bring that up, because those are the 2 other places in my mind went while reading this was to John Fante and his stories of California and of kind of living this kind of marginal life, and like the great story in one of his books about stealing the milk out of the back of the truck, and then there's this whole stress of, and then it's a sin because he's Catholic, and finally works with the clergy, he steals the milk and gets it back, and it turns out to be buttermilk, and he's just utterly crestfallen, like. And then Bukowski, who also that Los Angeles kind of coastal bumming, this hoboing thing. I think I have a real attraction to hobo stories.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to do maybe one of the Charles Willeford biographies, and is it Jack Black, You Can't Win?
Oh yes.
There's a few hobo adjacent books that I'm keen to get to on this show. Actually, I also share, and same as you, I'm probably totally romanticized, and I would be a great big wuss and couldn't even handle like 1 day traveling on a train, but somehow think
or even just a bunch of kind of layabout guys just skiving and just barely surviving and just drinking all day. There's a part of me that's like, oh yeah, I think and I look forward to potentially retiring into a life of being a layabout. Yeah,
I think you have to move somewhere warmer.
Yeah.
That's the thing, Mexico. It's like California in the States, I guess, and I suppose here in Japan it used to be to go down to Osaka, right? That would be number one. It's warmer, and it had a certain tolerance for daily
people being on the phone,
and which it doesn't anymore because they've torn down that iconic building in that part of Nishiyari. It doesn't exist anymore. So I don't know where they go now, but And I don't know if that comes up at all in those morons over at Film Crack or whatever the fuck they call it, the twats. They're doing a film soon, I think.
Oh, yes, I think that touches on some of this. The whole blue tarp, day laborer, Japanese life.
But anyway, don't watch them.
No.
Watch us. We're much better.
Yeah, we're much better looking for one thing.
And our penis is a bigger as well.
Just no question. Which is very important in your literary criticism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that you know that the person has a full, I feel like full pants load, but that just sounds like I crap myself. But I did I am feeling ill.
So shall we wind up?
I think so. I would say absolutely. I agree with you. I have no doubt that I will come back to this book because this front to back.
Your throat. Oh no!
There you go. Okay.
You did freeze before, and now you were just sitting very still indeed. So that you...
Anyway,
right.
I was
CANNERY Row, absolutely top notch. I mean, it's Steinbeck, right? But I would be surprised if I read a Steinbeck that I enjoy more than this one. And but it's entirely possible. I certainly, as I mentioned, my wife as well is. I think we're both kind of committed to eventually going through the whole Steinbeck bibliography. I think because he hasn't put a foot wrong yet.
Right.
I know that's not exactly the hot take. Stop the presses. Steinbeck's a really good writer. What? Like. Yeah. But sometimes when you're up against like a wall of when someone has such a literary reputation and you don't know where there's no foothold, you don't know where to start. CANNERY Row's a pretty good starting point.
I would think so too, because I think it has, as you mentioned, it has some of that epic scope in a way. It is like the story of a whole community, but it's punchy, it's fast, it's funny. It's dark when it needs to be dark. It kind of does a lot of what Grapes of Wrath does in 800 pages, in a couple of hundred. And I certainly remember laughing out loud a lot more than I did with Grapes of Wrath.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
There we go. Steinbeck's greatest hits. Yeah.
Yeah.
So until next time, then.
Yep. It's ta-ra from me.
And ta-ra from me. Bye. Oh, I did forget. Beer milkshake. That doesn't sound.
No, agreed. That was
I don't think I'll be trying that.
Me neither.